All right, so today we're talking about earnest money deposits and how do you do this the right way in New York, because this is one of the roadblocks. There's a few major roadblocks. I would say this is definitely one of them. And it's how do you start investing in New York? Or if you're an experienced guy, how do you get your, I would call it, deposit overhead down? Because if you don't know how to negotiate this, you're going to end up spending 50 grand a month in deposits. Michael, I know that this has been something you've been working on for a while. I think I've started to convince you to get your deposits down a little bit. I remember when we first met, I was like, dude, how do you stay in business with that? Like, you're putting 40 grand down, like that doesn't work, And
By the way, I look now, I got so much money out of deposits. It's crazy.
Yeah, I got a lot. I got a lot too. But
Oh.
it's getting better. But I just put a 5K deposit down today. Actually, I sent it to Mr. Ravella. So let's just, I'll have you start off. Like, why is New York have such high deposits? Like, why is this just in New York? Because a lot of people like can't believe it. Like in Delaware, by the way, I don't even put deposits down. I'll just leave it there.
Right. No. So a lot of states, you don't need to put any real earnest money down for the contract to be effective. In some states, it could be a de minimis amount, like it could be $10 or $50.
Even $1.
In some of those states, the seller actually has to deposit the money, or contract's not enforced. And in some states, just receiving the check is enough. But in New York, because the contracts are generated by a seller's attorney, and again, the transaction in New York takes place between a seller's attorney and a buyer's attorney, not between a buyer and a seller. The seller's attorney does not want to spend his time generating a contract unless he feels the buyer is somewhat obligated and there's some pain involved in the buyer walking away, right? So people in other states are used to having a contract that really the buyer can walk away from because there's an inspection contingency, which basically says the buyer can walk away in, for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month.
Meaningless.
But in New York, all inspections get done before the contract and any repairs that are needed are put into the contract. So the contract is pretty much, unless there's some kind of provision in there that's not typical, the contract is pretty much binding to the buyer. And one of the reasons, and now again, if a buyer walks away from a contract, his loss is his deposit. So most sellers' attorneys who prepare contracts want something significant, right? And standard, if it's a standard retail purchase and sale, it's going to be 10% of the purchase price. And you can always negotiate it, but most sellers' attorneys are not going to let you put $100 down as a EMD, as an earnest money deposit. They want you to have some pain, considering they've put in their time to generate the contract, which could take at least like 4 or 5 minutes.
I know, right? Those attorneys, they're so busy. Some of them drinking their espresso martinis at lunch. They're so busy, So right. I found this. So in our area, if you're in the Hudson Valley or Long Island, this is where it's really a main thing. I don't know if you're listening to this in Buffalo or Rochester. If you're up there, it's a completely different. Like, people hit me up all the time. I got a deal in New York. Do you want to buy it? And I'm like, where is it? And they're like, no, I'm good. Goes like, that's like another country. So if you're
in the Finger Lakes region,
the Finger Lakes, yeah, which is a nice area, but
it's a nice
if you're
area.
in the suburbs of the New York City area, this is where you're going to see the standard deposit request of 10%. So the average pickup price in my area is $275. $27,500 is what the standard deposit's going to be. So this is how you can combat that. So the first thing I'll say when it comes to negotiating this is that you need to be realistic, right? You can't expect a seller to take $100 down. That's just not it. It just screams red flag to them and their attorney, right? If someone's like, $500 we've gotten away with, like we just got away with that on a house actually in Woodbury by me, not by you. And because there's a Woodbury over there. And the house is in such bad condition. It's complete like decimate condition. So like the seller like agreed to that, but you got to bring it up before the attorney gets involved. So I'll give you what I normally say. And this is all deal dependent. Sometimes I'll put a decent deposit down. Sometimes I won't, depending on what's going on. So normally, let's say, the pickup price is 300 grand and normally you'd put 30 down and I want to put 5, right? Which is, I think, pretty reasonable. What I'll tell the seller is I'll say, listen, Mr. Seller, so the next steps here is that your attorney and my attorney are going to communicate about getting a contract out so I can sign it and send it back to you, right? The thing your attorney is going to probably bring up is that in this offer, it states my deposit is $5,000, not the typical $30,000. The reason it is $5,000 is because I buy 5 to 7 homes a month. And if I put down 10% on every single house, I would be out of business. So we're buying the house as is, we're closing on it in 35, 40 days. And because of all that, we do put down a $5,000 deposit. Now, my question for you, Mr. Seller, is, are you okay with that? Does that work for you? And usually when they say yes to that, because 9 out of 10 times they will, then you say, okay. So when your attorney says, oh, I don't know why this guy's trying to put down $5,000, you can address your attorney and you can tell him exactly why I'm doing that. And you understand where I'm coming from, right? So you're conditioning that seller to accept the lower deposit, right? Because if you just like try to send out a contract and then after the fact, he's like, oh, these guys want $5,000 down, and you never spoke to that seller, he's going to kind of think it's a scam or something, and he'll probably go.
You want to plant the seed, and that seller may never remember.
They probably won't. They probably won't if they're dealing with.
You won't tell his attorney, by the way, when you send out the contract, put in $5,000 deposit, and there will be 10%. But then when your attorney comes back to him and says, hey, the parties agreed to $5,000, and the seller's attorney asks his client, hey, this guy only puts $5,000 down, then he'll remember and he'll go, yeah, it's fine. I said it's okay.
100%. Yeah. So you got to condition the seller to accept that type of deposit. And that's another thing I wanted to mention here is like, you got to be realistic, right? If you're a wholesaler and you're not trying to close on this property, you got to understand that your risk is that deposit, and you need to make that deposit amount enough to get the seller to not see you're full of shit, but also not too much to where, like, you know, if the deal doesn't close for some reason, you're going to go, you know, all your money's gone or something like that. So like in my market, like if I'm really good, I can get away with like $1,000 to $3,000. If it's going to be more, if it's a wholesale deal, right? If it's a deal that I'm going to buy no matter what, if I got to put down 10%, I will. I don't care, because I'm buying it either way. So it's just going to contribute to the purchase price. But normally, you know, like today I put down $5,000 on a $140,000 buy price. Like that's not bad. Michael, what about you? I mean, you're in the island. It's a little bit different than mine.
Sure. So I've gotten away with like 3,000. That's the smallest I've gotten away with on
You've
a small
never
deal.
done $1,000 deposit?
Never done less than 3, never. And it was a mental thing, right?
Accepted. You please call me before, and I'll save you $2,000. Come on, this is easy.
Should. You're right. And for a while I was putting on 10%, and you tell me I was out of my mind, and I was. But then I started realizing that a lot of people will take 5. Sometimes they ask for 10, and if I have to give 5 or 10,
10 is fair.
Also,
10 is fine. Yeah.
Right. And also I can wire that out. I can wire that out of my own account from my desktop, so it's easy.
Yeah.
But I have, and if you want to talk about this case now, I have given as much as $100,000 as a down payment.
What on earth? Let's get into that. That's a great topic here. So $100,000? I mean, where were you? You had to be buying in the Hamptons or something like that. There's no way.
Yes, it was a property in East Hampton I was buying for about $1 million. I was positive that this was a $2 million ARV. And if you know East Hampton, there are many houses worth much more than $2 million.
Big money out there. Yeah, I was just out there.
The problem was that this house was not a $2 million ARV. I remember Zillow value was 2.2 million. This is one of my biggest proofs against how accurate Zillow is that Zillow had this so far off. So I went into contract at $1 million. I thought I had 2 guys to wholesale to it around 1.2. I thought it was an over. I think the first time we met, I was talking to you about it. Remember?
You told me in San Diego, you're like, oh, I got this house in the Hamptons. It's freaking sick, you know? And I'm like,
I thought it was going to be a 6-figure wholesale deal for sure. And then what happened was I soon realized there's no one's going to buy this for over $1 million.
Why?
Because it was in a small part of the Hamptons that just wasn't really worth it. And the house it was a huge house, but needed a lot of work. And so I thought I would close on it and do the work to it, and I'd get the value out that way. But then it was right next to like a scenic preserve, and it had a scenic easement around a huge portion of the property where I could not build a pool, right where I wanted to build a pool, couldn't build a pool. And I spoke to my attorney, I'm a litigation attorney I know, and he looked at the contract. He goes, I think you might have a way out of here. And I go, what is it? He goes, well, the contract says it's as is as pertains to a bunch of things, including utility easements. He goes, so the contract says utility easements, but you have a scenic easement. You actually have legal grounds to get your money back. I'm like, this is amazing. So we litigated. It took almost 2 years, but we won. We got the whole
You went to
$100,000 back.
court and everything, like it was a whole lawsuit.
I didn't appear, and it was during COVID, so everything took forever, and no one had to appear during COVID. But my attorney made a bunch of arguments against the other attorney. Now, and during that time, while this was going on, I wanted to know what the hell was going on with the house. I wanted people to go in and make lowball offers. I wanted to convince this guy. I don't know what the hell I was thinking, but then people would be careful. You might be committing tortious interference. And then I found he listed it, and they sold it for like $850,000, which is probably what it was worth.
Wait a minute. This sounds really interesting. Oh, it wasn't because Jeremiah bought a property for 800 grand in East Hampton. I was there like literally 2 weeks ago.
Yeah,
It wasn't that house. It wasn't the house.
No,
Because he paid 800 for it and he knocked it down.
no, not the same house.
Not the
So
same house.
definitely not.
That would've been funny.
So this one, so he sold it, and I
Yeah.
thought maybe that makes my position better. It didn't make any difference, but his position was this was an as-is contract, and I had people speak to him, and the seller, and they told me he's 100% sure he's going to keep the $100,000 deposit. Now he said something like, "I'll take $850 for it because I'm going to get another $100,000 because for my deposit." But my attorney's like, they're asking for summary judgment. I think we might have a case here, and he argued it, and we won summary judgment. He requested summary judgment from them. The judge granted summary judgment for us, so we got the whole $100,000 back.
That's crazy. How much did it cost you in legal fees to litigate that? What was the
Not
net?
much, maybe 7-8 grand.
Oh, so you basically got all your money back. Wow.
Yeah, it was pretty good. I got lucky. I thought we were going to lose it all. I really did. I thought we had and my attorney said you got as much chance to win as to lose.
So, well, I mean, the obvious lesson is put a lower deposit down next time. But like, besides the obvious, like, what are some other lessons you pulled away from
Okay,
this?
so I learned a couple of valuable lessons. Number one is I don't want to buy where it's so far away that I don't even want to go visit.
It is
East
far.
Hampton's very far.
From you, that's super far. That's got to be 2.5 hours to get out there.
With no traffic, it could be under 2, but with any traffic, it could
Dude,
be.
that's far. You got to take that whole, yeah.
So that's number one. Number two is I will be careful about luxury properties and valuing them, right? You got to be very careful, especially, by the way, it's ironic because today, the real areas where the luxury market's getting pinched are those top of the market areas.
Like,
but I also learned don't put a lot of money down on a deal like that, which is ironic because I have a contract here for another house in $1 million area that I was about to send in a deposit for, and today I looked at it and I'm like, I should have learned that lesson from this East Hampton property. I don't want to buy it. I'm going to call tomorrow and say I can't do it.
how much deposit do they want down?
They want 10, but I looked at it and I thought it's a $1 million area, beautiful area. And I thought I can get 900 for this, no problem. I got an ovatable contract, but at 820. And now I'm looking at the properties nearby are selling for 800. So I'm not.
You got to bail. You got to retrade or bail. Yeah. You got it. Interesting.
Yep.
All right. So basically the luxury market, and I've seen that too. Like if because that's not everybody needs a mansion in East Hampton, but everyone needs a 3-2 ranch in wherever, any town, USA, right? Nanuet, right? Or what's by you? What's that area by you that's really popular? Plainview.
Plainview is even a higher end, but like, I don't know, Hicksville, Levittown. That's
like basic, right?
Whatever, for $500,000 houses.
Yeah. So that's an interesting story. Here's a story, I guess. I'll give you an earnest money deposit story where this actually is not in New York, but it's me being stupid. This was in California, but I wouldn't say it's exactly similar, but it's some things about California and New York are similar. So I put down a $25,000 deposit on a wholesale deal. And it was like a weird property because the seller needed to take, so the laws in California are different with the New York, obviously. And in order to sell a property in California, you can't do an heirship affidavit. You have to go through probate, and it's a pain in the ass. So the seller was basically like signing a contract with me contingent upon her successfully going through probate. So the contract basically was invalid for the most part. It was like she signed it as soon to be executrix. Like it was like kind of bullshit. So she wanted me to put $15,000 down. And I was like, yeah, that's fine. I'll do that. Not a big deal. But I knew that the contract I signed with her was like bullshit. So I was like, I wasn't going to like call escrow. I was just like, let me just like submit this and like wait for her to like actually like get appointed. And then I'll put the deposit down because then we'll have a valid contract. So I kicked the can down the road, didn't put the deposit down. And then she ended up getting sued by her brother, and her brother went crazy and wanted another $10,000 down on top of the 15. And the market at this point was like crashing. So like I was sitting in contract and like I knew this, and I agreed to give her a rent back for 60 days for free. So I did a bunch of stupid agreements in this contract because at the time it was like the market was at the peak. I was like, oh my God, I can't lose here. Soma Place in El Cajon, like who wouldn't want to live here? House had like pool problems. Anyway, basically the closing company was like, yo, you got to send this deposit in. So then I sent 25 grand into the title company, basically the escrow company. And now I was like, oh, fuck, like I have something to lose here now, And I read the contract and it was like, fucking no, you cannot get your deposit back under any circumstances. And I was like, oh shit. So then I tried to wholesale it and nobody wanted it because the market crashed and my terms were horrible because they looked at my contract. They're like, dude, a rent back? What are you out of your mind? So I found one guy who like almost wanted it, but he ultimately didn't want it. He was going to just take my place over in the contract. And he just, at the end of the day, he was like, nah, dude, I don't think this is really, it's not a good deal. So then I was like, I have to cancel. I can't close on this house. It's like the value drops so much. So I ended up hiring an attorney that guy, Justin, who's a friend of mine, recommended. And I had him review the contract. And just like you, he found a loophole in the contract. It was like, because she wasn't the owner of the property when she signed it. So it predated it. And he sent her this nasty letter and she shit her pants and gave me the money back and cost me $1,000. So I lost $1,000. But the point is this, here's a takeaway for everyone. If you get into a sticky situation like Michael and I mean, Michael's was definitely worse than mine. If you have an attorney, not your closing attorney, like an actual specialist attorney,
a
litigator, they will be able to help you more than your closing attorney will, because a lot of these like closing attorneys and escrow companies, like they don't really want conflict. They don't like
they avoid conflict like the plague. They are not there to fight for you. They're there to do the best for you. And if everything goes fine, then they're great.
Right.
But as soon as you start needing a pit bull, you can't be using it.
So here's another goofy thing about California that I realized. So if you need to, like, when you put your money into like the escrow account with a third party, in order for the seller to like give it back, and this says in Florida too, this is the same thing. The seller has to like sign something, like it's called like an escrow release form or something. So like if the seller like hates you or something, like you could basically have your money sit in escrow forever if the seller never signs it. So like the attorney had to get the lady to like sign everything, and it was this whole thing. But be careful when you put go ahead.
No, so on that issue, so what a lot of people don't know is that they just assume that if I'm a buyer and for some reason I can't perform, I can't close, that the seller's just going to keep your deposit. But it doesn't work that way.
How does that work actually? I've never had that. I've given my deposit. I had this happen last year. I put $3,500 down, I think, or $3,000 in Newburgh. And I said, dude, eat my deposit. I don't give a fuck. I didn't close. Like my bad.
I had a $20,000 deposit with a buyer who was supposed to close, scheduled to close, and couldn't close. Apparently she had a really bad attorney, because the attorney goes, yeah, just keep the deposit, we're releasing it. He didn't have to say that, right? He could have just,
how does
if
that
he
work?
would have said, hey, let's split it, I probably would have said, okay, because I can't get that money until the other side agrees to give it to me. So that's another thing. Like if you ever are in a situation where you put a deposit down and everything hits the fan, don't just release your deposit. It's a very complicated legal process to get that out of escrow. That is,
yeah.
The seller's attorney can't just take that money and write a check to his client.
Oh,
he's got to have a release from you, even though you blew it. Right now, there is a process where he can force you to close and you don't close. But even then, he's got to inform you about taking the money, and he still can't. Like, there's always room for negotiation. So if you ever put a deposit down and you screw up, if you use a decent attorney, your decent attorney can go, hey, we can litigate this for 10 years, or your client can split it with mine, and we'll be done with it. And I would say 9 times out of 10, they'll take it.
So in New York, I didn't know this. So basically the attorney just doesn't say like, cause in the contract, usually it says like, if buyer defaults, sole remedy is the earnest money deposit, whatever that boilerplate language is.
Right, but it's still the money that's in escrow. It's not just, it doesn't automatically legally transfer to for the seller's account. There's a process, and it's a complicated process, and you can sue for it, and you can litigate it for 10,000 years if you want to. You could spend 50 times the amount of the deposit on legal fees if you want to. And if the seller realizes that you're going to sue him, if you're going to, I forgot what it's called, if you're going to like sue him to not use the funds, it can take forever, right? And most guys will just say, I'll take half and be done with it.
Just get out of there.
Going through it with one decent, nasty letter, that usually can be done.
Interesting. Yeah, that's, I didn't know that. I thought it was more of like, cause I should have pushed back. Cause this guy, here's a quick story. So I turned around, got a contract on this property. It seemed like it was a good deal on paper, kind of like the one you just told me about. And then I actually I had the private money all lined up, ready to go. And something about the seller, he was a little like, he just didn't seem like he operated on the above. He didn't seem very above. He seemed like he was just a charlatan, to be honest with you. He just seemed very like, something about him, I just like, it kind of like alarmed me. So I actually went to the property. It was on 51 Chestnut in Newburgh. He ended up selling it to his neighbor. Fucking idiot. But anyway, so I showed up here, and like the whole house had like unpermitted work done. And I'm like, oh, no wonder. Like, thank God I went to this thing. The whole basement was like terrible. And I'm like, and the septic was shot and like everything. I'm like, you know what? I told the lender, I said, deals off. No, like none.
How much of a deposit did you have in it?
3,500, I think. And I just said, and his attorney was Giselle, actually. I was like, hey, Giselle, just keep the money.
Now you did the right, but 3,500, it's not worth it. I mean, you would have lost much more, and it wouldn't have been worth it. It's not worth getting into it.
Yeah.
But I'm saying if it's significant,
if it's in the what is it? Is it 8 figures? What? 5 figures. 8 figures.
It's 8 figures is $10 million.
So unless you're buying and selling the Taj Mahal,
Yeah. So I'm just saying, if it's significant, sometimes they'll split it with you. If it's small, if I had a $2,000 deposit on something like that, I think I might just go forget it.
So how about this? I got a question for you, Michael, because you're like done more deals, especially in New York. What happens when this event occurs? So you have, let's say the properties in like Shirley where it's cheap, right? Somewhere cheap within reason, obviously. You're dealing with people who don't have a lot of money compared to other people. So they're going to get a FHA 3% down loan, right? How the fuck are they going to put 10% down when they're only putting 3% down at the loan? How does that work?
Yeah, they don't. So very often they don't. It's one more reason not to avoid FHA buyers.
Yeah,
very often
100%.
They only have 3.5%, which is what FHA requires. Usually it's like a few grand. Occasionally they have money and they just don't want to borrow, and they just want to borrow more. But very often on an FHA kind of situation, you'll see in the binder or the offer sheet that they're only putting like $5,000, $10,000 down or something like that on a $300,000 house.
Yeah. Because I'm thinking about that now. I've had that happen. I actually had a property in New Windsor one time, and the guy had like put $1,000 down, and I was like, this deal's never going to close ever. And it closed.
It did, right?
So when
it can. But
when a conventional buyer goes in and they're putting up 20% down, they're basically putting half their money down in the deposit, right?
Not every, listen, I just had a couple of things go to contract to sell, and the buyer put like $20,000 down on like a $450,000 sale. I understand. It's like he didn't have the money. It's like the rest of the money's coming as a gift. Sometimes they don't have it. If it's significant, I'm okay with it. I don't always ask for 10% down when I sell. I just went to contract today. I think they put it was $20,000 down on a $560,000 sale. But she's like, the rest of the money is coming as a gift from my mother or something like that. I don't know. I
don't really care when I'm the seller, to be honest with you.
I just want it to be significant so that I know they're not going to jerk me around and walk away.
I'm the same way, dude. I don't really care. I'm just like, you know what? Like if they're putting down, like we have a wholesale deal we're selling. Just found a buyer there the other day for 153.6, I think 153,605, 202 Concord Lane, Middletown, New York, 10940. I actually, when I was first born, I lived in that townhouse or condo complex. Isn't that fucking crazy? Now I'm wholesaling houses there 27 years later. But 10%. So it's 15,605 or whatever. So I try to get the buyers when I'm wholesaling to put 10% down. But if they're like, hey, I can put down $8,000, I'm like, whatever. Like I usually have 1,000 down. So what do I care?
100%. It's got to make sense, and you got to know what's going on. It's every situation is different. That's true. And sometimes you only have one. If you only have one buyer, you're pretty much going to do whatever the hell they're going to put down, right? Right. That's true. It's a question of comparing it to other buyers who maybe want to put down more. You have to decide which one makes sense.
So we'll end the show with this quick story. So today we had a wholesale deal close, and the buyer was being a complete idiot. And this happened like 2 weeks ago. Like the lender was a bullshitter or anything. So I remember I was on the phone with a guy. What was this? This was when I was overseas. I said, listen, dude, if you don't close, that $10,000 check you wrote is going in my pocket. So just know this. If you don't find a way to get this done, that 10 grand is going into my pocket. And just know that. And he got pissed and he ended up closing today because he knew he had something to lose. So it's got to be enough to where it stings. That's the main takeaway. So hope people got value today. To summarize the show, number one, you need to set the seller's expectations. Number two, you need to be realistic, right? If you're in the tri-state area, don't put $100 down. It's not going to work ever, right? You're looking at
don't put $100,000 down. It's probably not a good idea there.
Yeah, I would never do that. Well, depending on what the deal is, but usually you're looking in the Hudson Valley, you're anywhere from 1 to 10 grand, and in Long Island, you're looking from 2,500 to 25,000. That's kind of, and then in Westchester, it's the same as Long Island.
Right.
I've gotten away I've gotten away in like a really bougie area, Westchester. I got away with like $1,000, which was interesting.
Well, good for you.
Yeah. And then the other one we just did in Westchester was like, it was a lot. The deposit was like 35 or 40 grand, right? Non-refundable. So I was like, hope this works out. So anyway, if you get value from the show, subscribe, share it with people. Michael, I hope you have got a great evening. It's getting a little late over there in New York. And we'll talk with everyone in the next episode. See ya.